The year is drawing to a close. As always, no matter how many projects I complete, there are always a million others that I didn't get to. However, I think I have time for just one more. I have 2 large chunks of this red plaid. I think it's the Steward tartan, and it's been in my stash since Hancock's was a store. It's pretty lightweight, with a bit of stretch. I think the fiber content was labeled something like 80% polyester, 20% wool, and a few percent spandex. I can't remember exactly, but it has been almost a decade since I bought it. I was just so excited at that point in my life to find actual fabric with actual wool content that I could actually afford. Of course, now, compared to the gorgeous wools that I've gotten to use lately, with all of their depth and richness and texture, compared to them, it looks a bit flat and feels very cheap and thin. My original plan of using it to make a historical costume is no longer appealing. But luckily, I have an alternative idea. This is Shiranatra, if you don't already know. She primarily operates on Instagram and is a vintage fashion connoisseur. Honestly, if I could just magically clone her entire wardrobe with Barbie Rapunzel's paintbrush, I would die happy. She has a red dress that immediately stuck out to me because it's the exact same tartan I have, though in a smaller scale. Going back in her feed, I found that the dress came from a brand called the Pretty Dress Company. They no longer sell this exact style, but they have recently offered similar dresses in the same red plaid, if that's something that interests you. But hey, guess what? A sold-out dress is no bother, because I can sew. I think I want to make the dress almost exactly following the cut of Shiranatra's dress. That means 2 bust darts and a neckline that is wide and square, but slopes in closer to the neck at the shoulders. The sleeves are not quite elbow length, and the skirt is gloriously full. It looks like, since there is a vertical stripe at the front and also the side, it looks like a full circle skirt, but it's also got these large box pleats, so it could be up to 3 times the circumference of her waist pleated down, meaning that the skirt is actually much fuller at the hem than even a normal circle skirt. It's magnificent, and I want it. So the dress is something like this. I do have quite a bit of fabric, and I'm hoping that there'll be some left over. If there is, since this is a short sleeve dress for December weather, I'd like to either make some sort of capelet or a matching jacket. The patterning was quite simple. If you've watched my previous video, I talked about fitting a basic block pattern to myself, and since finishing that video and wearing that jumper, I've tweaked my block a bit more to refine the fit. So now, all I'll need to change for this project is the neckline. I also have my new pocket pattern and the unfitted sleeve pattern that came with my bootstrap block pattern set. For the skirt, I'll be drafting up something fresh. The neckline was very simple. I drew a horizontal line parallel to the waistline, and then I drew a vertical line at a slight angle. I rounded out the corner, then marked where that line met the shoulder seam allowance, transferred it to the back piece, and used that mark to place the back neckline. Of course, don't forget seam allowance, or your neckline will turn out much lower than you intended. And for the sleeves? I'll come back to them later. For the skirt, I want to pattern a full circle skirt that is 30 inches long and 3 times the size of my waist, so that I can fully pleat it up. The math for this gave me an 84-inch circumference for the waist and a 21-inch long curve for a quarter of the pattern. I plugged that 84 inches into a formula to find the radius, which turned out to be 13.369 inches, which I rounded up to 13 3/8 of an inch. Finding the inner corner of my pattern, I marked the radius, and then swung my pen in an arc from that corner. Measuring it back, it was almost exactly 21 inches, so I'll take that as a win. Then I measured down from that waistline, marking 30-inch lengths, connected them into another curve, and that's my pattern. However, when I laid it out on my fabric, I discovered that I didn't have quite as much as I thought, or rather, my pattern was just absolutely massive. I fiddled around with the pattern and the fabric, but it just was not going to work, even if I tried piecing it. So I didn't end up getting to use this pattern, but I'll include it in the video because I want to use it someday, and it would make a glorious skirt. Instead, I played around with the options. I did consider making the skirt much shorter, because then I could get 2 full circle skirts out of it, which would make the hem very full and still give me some pleating depth up top. However, I have learned through past mistakes that going shorter and fuller usually isn't the most flattering option. So instead I opted for a longer skirt, almost my original 30 inches, but only a half circle skirt about twice the circumference of my waist. So it will still end up being very full with pleating, but it just won't be quite as awesome as the original design. Another thing to note, since the skirt will be a half circle, all one piece, that means that there will be no side seams, and if I separated the panels to add side seams, they would be fully on the diagonal of the bias, which I'd really rather not do. So I decided to skip pockets this time around. I probably could have squeezed them in somewhere, but this is really meant to be a Christmas party dress, so it can do without pockets. I cut my bodice pieces out of the remnants of the skirt, trying to conserve as much as I could for my potential jacket. I was careful about the plaid pattern, lining up the pieces individually to make sure that they matched. I cut a lining for the bodice out of some linen I already had on hand, and we're ready to go. For reference, this patterning and cutting out usually takes me a full workday, what with all of the mock-ups and revisions. This one only took me about a half day, and it's only my second project with a bodice block, so hopefully I'll continue to shave off time from here. Alright, day 2. Time to start with the zipper. And I'm going to use this one from my stash, which does not match very well at all, but the fact that I have it means that this is a completely stash-busting project, no new purchases, which doesn't happen very often. Before I can insert the zipper, I need to close up that back seam of the skirt, leaving several inches open at the top. I matched up the plaids and stitched along that center stripe. This is not a perfect way to pattern match. You will get more perfect results by hand basting first. However, one of the things I'm working on with myself are low-stakes projects. Not everything has to be frustrating, and not everything has to turn out perfect, and it's okay to take it easy on some projects. I'm trying to start looking at sewing not as a means to gain a material item, like in this case a dress. I'm finding that it's much better to seek value in the learning you acquire from the practice of sewing. Every project is a learning experience, with experiments and mistakes and light bulb moments and ideas for how to improve your work next time. That is what I am primarily out to gain. The finished project is just a side perk, a bit of wearable proof of what I've learned. So I basted the invisible zipper into place and then stitched it on my modern machine. Then I serged the back seam allowance to finish it, though I didn't go all the way up since the bodice back will be covered by the lining. I tried to avoid serging in videos since not everyone has one available. An alternative to this would be felling the seams by hand, which would have been my second go-to since this fabric was very prone to fraying. But you could also zigzag over them, or pink them, or you could bind them with a bit of hem tape. Now, there was a major gaping problem with the neckline. I seem to remember from past projects that gaping was a frequent fallacy with unstructured square necklines, especially as wide and low as I made this one. So how I decided to fix it is basically the same as the drawstring I added at the neckline of my chin spine dress last spring. I pinned the neckline flat, then stitched a line across the front about 1/4 of an inch from the top edge. I left the ends open and then threaded through a narrow strip of elastic. Then I closed the ends of the channel, stitching through the elastic several times to secure it. I had left the armscye and lining hanging loose so that I could reach inside to insert the elastic, but once the neckline was done, I basted the 2 layers together, which will make the sleeve insertion later on a mite easier. Okay, to finish it, I need to get the sleeves in. For the sleeve pattern, I decided to use the sleeve from my pumpkin jacket. It started out as the bootstrap pattern, but I had already done some work on it that I didn't feel like repeating. I cut it shorter and then cut it out of my scraps. I was almost too short to get the pattern matching right, but it just barely worked. To sew the sleeves, I decided not to add a lining and just stitched the underarm seams and then serged them. I added a long gathering stitch around the sleeve cap to ease it into the armscye. I ironed up the hem, then hand-stitched it down using the same invisible tacking stitch as the dress hem. Then I pinned each sleeve into each armscye and gathered it up, smoothing out the tucks around the cap, centering them a little towards the back. After I stitched the sleeves into the armscyes, I clipped around the curves and then serged them. This is by far the fastest and easiest way to finish a sleeve, but I don't think it's the most comfortable. It's something I'll have to consider alternative methods for later. Now, the dress is finished, but I only have 1 day left to make my jacket. Forgive me, I'm going to have to breeze through this. Filming makes sewing twice as time-consuming, and I was very short on time if I wanted to actually finish this video before Christmas. Basically, I barely had enough fabric to make a jacket and a hooded capelet, which I decided to combine into one piece. The bodice pattern is the same as before, though I reversed the opening from the back to the front. The sleeve is the same one I just used for the dress, but extended back to full length. For the hood, I'm roughly tracing this pattern, which was my grandma's, which she actually made. I found the pattern in one box of her things, and I found the cape in another, and I actually found the scrap fabric from the cape in another. She kept that scrap fabric for who knows how many years. 30 at least? All I'm saying is, God bless Depression-era grandparents. For the capelet, I'm using the half circle that I cut out from the center of the skirt. It isn't very large, but hopefully it'll be enough. For the lining, I have some dark navy wool stuff that's been in my stash for over a year. I bought it from Burnley and Trowbridge to make an Outlander bodice, but it was too lightweight and too dark of a color. For lining the sleeves, I find that I need something silky, otherwise whatever sleeve I'm wearing beneath it catches and drags. So here's a bit of brown silk habitoy from my stash. One thing I did actually buy for this project is a couple yards of brown faux fur trim. I was looking for white because Christmas, but they didn't have any, so I just went with this, but I like how it turned out so much more. So, starting with the jacket. I assembled it just like I did the dress bodice, and then I put the jacket and lining right sides together. This time I stitched around the entire outer edge, not just the neckline. Then I clipped it, understitched those seams, and turned it right side out and pressed it. For the sleeves, I put them right sides together and stitched around the cuff, but I sandwiched in a ring of fur facing inward. This was super fiddly and thick to stitch through, and basically the hardest part of the whole project. But then I turned it all right side out, and it does look really great. Then I stitched the outer layer of the sleeves onto the jacket. Then I turned in the lining edge and felled it down. So that's one way to finish a sleeve without having to serge it. Okay, so the jacket is done, but it needs a cape and a hood. For the hood, I already explained my pattern, but for the capelet, here's basically what I did. I lined up the bodice front and back along the vertical and horizontal lines of the half circle. I met them up at the outer shoulder and marked it. Then I cut a super funky shape along those lines and repeated it on the other side. That pin will mark the inner corner of a dart. This worked alright, but on the final piece it's a bit too sharp of an angle. If I were to do it again, instead of one deep dart, I probably would have just guesstimated a smooth curve and then gathered it around the back. But it's not bad. So I stitched those darts, and then I stitched around the bottom edge of the capelet, and then I understitched it. For the hood, I stitched around the curved outer edge. Then I lined up the 2 hood layers wrong sides together and sewed a gathering stitch from roughly the shoulders back. Then I lined up all 4 pieces, sandwiching the hood in the middle and gathered up the back. I did a weird thing because of the fur trim. I unpinned the 2 lining layers and folded them a few inches away from the front edge, and then just sewed those 2 red layers. Then I folded the lining back down and stitched around the neck, but I left the first 2 inches unstitched. You'll see why in a bit. Then I clipped around the neckline and turned the capelet right side out. Now to add the trim. I cut my strip of fur into 2 and then lined it back up so that the grain of both sides would be running downwards. Then I lined it up with that front edge of the capelet and hood and stitched all the way around, leaving the lining to dangle free behind it. Then I turned the fur out, folded the lining edges in, and pinned them down. I felled them, and when I got to the neckline I had to tack down that extra bit that I had left hanging free and out of the way. Now, I could have left these as individual pieces, but I just felt like they would fit better and stay in place better if they were one. So I hand-stitched the capelet neckline to the jacket neckline. For a final touch, I added a fancy brass closure to the throat. And this project is done! Then I also decided to make some matching earrings from red jade and freshwater pearls. The thing I've recently discovered about earrings is that the kind I like are difficult to find and really easy to make, so that's one more thing I'm happy to add to my repertoire. So I did learn several things with this one. The biggest thing I learned is that with basic block patterns, you need to account for your fabric weight. On my jumper dress, it's super thick and dense, and it also has enough ease to be comfortably worn over sweaters. I didn't think to trim any of that ease off, and the resulting bodice of this dress is about an inch larger than I'd like. The fabric is very thin, and it's not worn over sweaters, and it's stretchy on top of that. So I definitely should have trimmed my pattern down, and I'll need to adjust my block. Other than that, the darts are much better with the adjusted apex. The arms and sleeves still need a bit of work at the front shoulder, but they aren't terrible. The only thing wrong is that I officially have now overcorrected the waist length. I shortened it again after the jumper, and then I also shortened it at the shoulders. I think shortening the shoulders was right, but the waist was too much. So now I've added a ½ inch back into the waist length of my pattern. None of these things are a big deal, they're just worth mentioning. The only thing I'm actually unhappy with is the neckline. I think the problem is that because the rest of the bodice is too loose, the square neck gathers too much and it's kind of baggy. And also I cut it too wide so it tends to show the bra straps. I suppose in the future I could alter the dress to improve the fit, but I might just leave it. I find starting new projects to be much more motivating than endlessly trying to improve my old projects. The jacket I'm pretty much fine with. The shoulders are a bit sharp as I mentioned earlier, and I wish that the cape was a little bit longer in the front, but there's not much I could have done about that. Overall though, I really love the colors of the plaid and the navy and the brown fur together. I just think they're such a classic Christmas combination. It's still wintry, but has more of a foresty vibe. All of the plaid together is a bit much, but I like that I could pair these pieces with other skirts or dresses or coats in the future, which would help tone it down. But for my purposes for this year, I'm excited to wear them. Like tomorrow. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. Meanwhile, I have 2 months left of winter and about 4 more projects that I'd like to complete. I am going to take some time in early January to make a few non-sewing videos, now that I'm closing out 3 years since I stopped buying clothing and began the journey of converting my clothing to a home-sewn wardrobe. There's a lot I've learned, and I feel like this winter everything is really starting to come together, and I feel like it's a good time to talk about it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more of my work, you can subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow my Instagram. You can also check out my Patreon for updates and patterns if that's something that interests you. And I have a whole nother channel just for world building and another Instagram for that. See ya!